Millionaire CEO divorced his pregnant wife at her mother's burial. Unaware, she just inherited $800 million. Hi my beautiful family, welcome back to Mr. Peter's Stories, your own family story channel. May the Almighty pour His boundless mercy upon you and your homes. May He clothe every woman with unbreakable strength, deep wisdom, and a heart so powerful it heals generations. May your tears be counted and turned into joy, your silent sacrifices be rewarded, and your dignity rise like a crown upon your head. You are the soul of families, the quiet force behind every success, the love that keeps this world alive. May peace guard your hearts, health surround your bodies, and hope never leave your side. May every prayer whispered in silence be answered, and may light follow you wherever you go. If your heart is true, like the video. If your love is real, write, "I am with Mr. Peter." Rain had stopped an hour before the burial, leaving the October grass slick beneath Benita's swollen feet. She stood beside the open grave, watching workers prepare to lower Mama Nivola's casket into Texas earth. 7 months pregnant, her body ached in places she didn't know could hurt. The black maternity dress she'd bought yesterday already felt too tight across her belly, where Jack kicked and twisted, oblivious to the grief pressing down on everyone above ground. 12 people came. Mama's best friend, Mrs. Okoye, 3 nurses from the hospital where she'd worked, neighbors who'd known her for decades, the pastor from their church. Small gathering for a woman who'd touched hundreds of lives, but Mama had always said funerals weren't about crowds, they were about truth. Who actually showed up when showing up was hard. Patrick's car appeared 47 minutes after the service started. Benita tracked the black Tesla as it rolled past the small crowd and parked far from the gathering. He stayed inside. Through tinted windows, she watched light from his phone screen illuminate his face. Her husband was working while her mother's body waited for earth. The pastor finished his prayer. People lined up to drop flowers into the grave. Mrs. Okoye squeezed Benita's hand so hard it hurt. "Don't go to him yet, baby. Let him wait in that car. Let him feel what waiting feels like." But Benita was done waiting. Done hoping Patrick would suddenly transform into the man she'd needed him to be for the past 6 months. Done pretending his absence hurt less than it did. She walked across damp grass, her pregnant waddle making the journey feel longer than it was. Behind her, cemetery workers stood ready to finish their job once the family drama concluded. Patrick stepped out when she got close. His suit probably cost more than Benita's monthly salary. Charcoal grey, perfectly tailored, the kind of clothing that announced wealth without screaming it. He held a manila envelope and wore the expression of a man dealing with an unpleasant but necessary task. "Sign these now." No hello, no acknowledgement of where they were or why, just the envelope thrust toward her like a transaction. "My attorneys need them filed first thing Monday. Gina moved her things into the house last night. The movers finished around 10. Inside the envelope, divorce papers. Benita pulled them out with hands that had held her mother's cold fingers 3 days ago in the hospital. The papers were thick, official, complete. He'd planned this, prepared everything while she'd been scheduling funeral arrangements and picking out a casket on a social worker's recommendation because she couldn't afford anything expensive. Settlement offer, $250,000 paid quarterly over 2 years. Custody arrangement already drafted. Joint legal custody with her as primary physical guardian. Him taking the child every other weekend once the baby turned 6 months old. No claim to his business assets. No claim to their home. No claim to anything they'd built together for 8 years. "Okay," Benita said. The word came out steady, calm. Nothing like the screaming tornado inside her chest. Patrick's face shifted. "Okay. That's it." What had he expected? Begging, tears, a scene in front of her mother's open grave. "What else did you want me to say?" "I expected—" He stopped himself. "Never mind. This is better. Clean. The settlement's fair given circumstances. Most men wouldn't offer anything considering how you've let yourself go." Let yourself go. Benita looked down at her swollen belly. her puffy ankles, her unwashed hair pulled back because she'd been too exhausted from crying to care about appearances. She'd spent 6 months sleeping in hospital chairs while her mother slowly drowned in cancer. She'd held Mama's hand through chemotherapy, radiation, the terrible final weeks when pain medication couldn't touch the agony. She'd missed work, maxed out credit cards, stopped going to the gym, stopped dyeing the grey roots Patrick once teased her about. She'd become ugly in his eyes because she'd chosen to be human. Gina's excited about redecorating. Patrick checked his phone. She hired someone who did that place in Austin that got featured in Architectural Digest. Fresh start for both of us. Gina, 25, taught spinning classes at the executive gym Patrick joined 6 months ago. Skin bronzed and smooth, body sculpted and tight, Instagram feed full of motivational quotes and sponsored protein shakes. Everything Bonita wasn't anymore. Everything Patrick apparently needed her to be. The baby kicked hard. Jack. Though they hadn't agreed on a name, Bonita had picked it alone in the hospital while her mother lay dying 2 floors down. Patrick hadn't visited once in those final weeks, too busy preparing for his company's IPO, the event that would make him a billionaire, and her a footnote. "I have meetings." Patrick was already turning back toward his car. "Get those signed and dropped off by end of business Monday. My assistant has the address." Bonita watched him leave, watched the Tesla glide past her mother's grave without stopping, without Patrick even glancing at the casket of the woman who'd welcomed him into their family, who'd cooked him Sunday dinners, who'd told Bonita on her wedding day that she'd chosen a good man. Mama had been wrong, or maybe Patrick had been good once, and success had rotted something essential inside him. She walked back to her car, a Honda with a cracked windshield and a check engine light that had been on for 3 months. She couldn't afford to fix it, couldn't afford much of anything on her data analyst salary. The studio apartment she'd rented after moving out of their house cost half her paycheck. The rest went to ramen noodles, prenatal vitamins, and the crushing weight of her mother's final medical bills. Her phone buzzed, voicemail from a number she didn't recognize. She played it while watching workers lower her mother into the ground. "Ms. Nivola, this is Raymond Morrison from Morrison & Associates. I'm the attorney handling your mother's estate. I apologize for the timing, but we need to meet urgently. There are matters regarding your inheritance requiring immediate attention. Please call me back today if possible." Inheritance. Probably a few $1,000s from the rental properties Mama had mentioned owning. Maybe 10,000 if Bonita was lucky. Enough to cover funeral costs and buy a crib for Jack. Enough to survive a few months of maternity leave before she'd have to find daycare and return to work, because Patrick's settlement wouldn't cover basic expenses. Bonita pulled out a pen from her cup holder. The divorce papers had sticky tabs marking signature lines. She signed each one methodically. Bonita Wilson ceased to exist on page after page, replaced by Bonita Nivola. Her maiden name returned, her marriage dissolved, her future rewritten in legal terms that reduced 8 years to property divisions and custody schedules. When she finished, she looked in the rearview mirror. Mrs. Okoye stood alone by the grave, the last person remaining. Everyone else had gone home to their lives while Mama went into the earth. Bonita should have been standing there too, should have been the final witness to her mother's burial, but instead she'd been signing papers that erased her marriage to a man who couldn't wait one respectful day to destroy what remained of their life together. She started the car and drove away from the cemetery. Tomorrow she'd call the estate attorney. Tomorrow she'd begin figuring out how to be a single mother. Tomorrow she'd start living whatever life came next. But today she felt nothing except the weight of her belly and the hollow space where her heart used to be. Her phone rang again, Attorney Morrison calling back. This time Bonita answered. "Ms. Nivola, thank you for picking up. I know this is the worst possible timing." Morrison's voice carried practiced sympathy. "But your mother left very specific instructions. I need to see you tomorrow morning if you're available. 9 o'clock at my office downtown. This can't wait." "What's this about?" Bonita asked. "How much did she leave?" That's something we need to discuss in person." Morrison paused. "Ms. Nivola, your mother was a remarkable woman. What she built over 40 years is extraordinary. You'll understand everything tomorrow. Can you make 9 o'clock?" "I'll be there." Bonita ended the call and drove home through streets that suddenly felt unfamiliar. The city looked the same, but something had shifted. Patrick was gone. Mama was gone. Jack was coming. And apparently there was something about her mother's life that Bonita didn't understand yet. She parked outside her studio apartment and sat in the gathering darkness. Inside that tiny space was a mattress on the floor, a mini fridge, a microwave, and boxes of her belongings she hadn't unpacked, because unpacking meant accepting this was her life now. Outside that tiny space was Patrick in his mansion with Gina planning renovations. 2 worlds, 2 futures. Hers looked like survival. His looked like triumph. Bonita placed both hands on her belly. "It's just us now, Jack. You and me against everything, but we're going to be okay. Your grandmother made sure of that. I don't know how yet, but I trust her. She always had a plan." The baby kicked in response. Bonita took it as agreement and went inside to face whatever tomorrow morning would bring. Chapter 2. The Inheritance. Morrison's office occupied the 19th floor of a building Bonita had passed 1,000 times but never entered. Glass and steel and money. She rode the elevator wearing the same black dress from yesterday's funeral because it was the only professional clothing that still fit. Her reflection in the polished doors showed exhaustion and pregnancy in equal measure. This is what defeat looked like. This is what Patrick saw when he looked at her now. The receptionist led her to a conference room with windows overlooking downtown. From this height, the city spread out like a game board. Somewhere down there was Wilson Tech headquarters, the company Patrick had built from nothing into something worth hundreds of millions. Somewhere down there was the studio apartment where Bonita would raise Jack alone. 2 points on a map, 2 different altitudes. Raymond Morrison entered carrying a leather portfolio embossed with her mother's initials. He was older, silver-haired, wearing a watch that probably cost more than Bonita's car. He shook her hand gently and sat across from her with the careful manner of someone delivering news that would change lives. "Your mother was my client for 23 years, Morrison began. "She was one of the most financially sophisticated people I've ever represented. I've worked with billionaires who understood money less than Theodora Nivola did." Bonita's throat tightened at her mother's full name. "She was a nurse. She worked double shifts. I don't understand." "Your mother was a nurse by choice, not necessity." Morrison opened the portfolio and pulled out documents. "She worked because she loved helping people, but her real genius was real estate investment. She began buying land in the 1970s when prices were low. Industrial areas, undeveloped parcels, plots near highways that nobody wanted. She bought strategically and held patiently." He slid a property list across the table. Bonita scanned addresses in Houston, Phoenix, Dallas. Acreage numbers that meant nothing to her. Legal descriptions full of technical terms. "I don't understand what I'm looking at." "Commercial land, 12 major properties across 3 states. Your mother never developed them herself. Instead, she leased the land to companies who wanted to build. Office complexes, warehouses, retail centers. She gave them long-term leases at below-market rates in exchange for certain contractual terms that benefited her holdings long-term. She played a 40-year game." Morrison pulled out another document. "This property is 4 acres in the downtown business district. Your mother acquired it in 1981 for $90,000. 9 years ago, a tech startup approached her about leasing it for their headquarters. They were growing fast but cash poor. Your mother agreed to $50,000 monthly rent for a 10-year lease." He turned his laptop so Bonita could see the screen. Aerial view of a modern building, glass and steel, parking lot full of expensive cars. "That company built a $60 million facility on your mother's land. They've paid rent for 9 years. Market rate for that property today is $500,000 monthly. Your mother gave them an extraordinary deal." Bonita stared at the building. Something about it looked familiar. "What company?" "Wilson Tech, your husband's company." Morrison's voice stayed neutral. Your mother owned the land under Patrick's headquarters. She's been his landlord for 9 years. He never knew. The room tilted. Benita gripped the table edge, knuckles white. Patrick doesn't know my mother owned this. Nobody knows. Your mother created multiple holding companies and trusts to own the properties. Different names, different structures, everything designed for privacy. On paper, Wilson Tech leases from Nivola Holdings. Unless someone traced ownership through several legal layers, they'd never connect it to your mother. Morrison leaned forward. She knew about your marriage to Patrick. She knew where his company was located. She never said it explicitly, but I believe she wanted you to have leverage if you ever needed it. Mama had known, had seen something in Patrick that Benita missed, had quietly built protection while saying nothing, letting Benita make her own choices, keeping the safety net hidden until it was needed. The realization made grief crash over Benita in fresh waves. How much is the portfolio worth? Her voice came out whisper-thin. Morrison pulled out an appraisal report. Based on current market valuations, approximately $800 million. That includes land value and projected income from existing leases. $800 million. The number was too large to process. Benita thought about the studio apartment, the ramen noodles, the check engine light, the medical bills, the crushing fear of how she'd afford diapers and formula and everything a baby needed. $800 million. There's a complication. Morrison's tone shifted. Texas is a community property state. Assets acquired during marriage typically split 50-50, unless there's a prenup. You didn't have one. He pulled out a calendar. Patrick filed for divorce 6 days ago. Texas law gives both parties 90 days to declare all marital assets. If he discovers your inheritance within that window, he's legally entitled to half. Benita's mind sharpened despite exhaustion. But Mama died before he filed. Exactly, which means you technically inherited while still married. If Patrick finds out within the next 84 days, he can claim $400 million. Morrison folded his hands. However, if we wait until day 91, the divorce finalizes and the asset disclosure window closes. Anything you inherit after that is yours alone. So I have to hide $800 million for 84 days. You have to live your normal life for 84 days, work your job, live in your apartment, act exactly like the struggling single mother Patrick expects you to be. Can you do that? Benita thought about Patrick handing her divorce papers at Mama's grave, thought about him moving Gina into their home before her mother was even buried, thought about 8 years of marriage dismissed like a failed business venture. Yes, I can do that. There's something else. Morrison pulled up a file on his laptop. The Wilson Tech lease expires in 6 weeks. They've been trying to reach us about renewal terms for the past month. I've been sending standard acknowledgements without actually negotiating. They're getting nervous. What happens if the lease isn't renewed? They'd need to vacate the property. For a company preparing to go public, losing their headquarters 6 weeks before IPO would be catastrophic. Investors would see it as instability. The IPO would likely be delayed or cancelled entirely. Morrison studied her face. I'm not suggesting anything, just explaining your options. Patrick's IPO. He'd been preparing for it since before Mama got sick. The event that would transform Wilson Tech from successful private company to billion-dollar public entity. The event he'd been willing to sacrifice everything for, including her. Don't renew it, Benita said. Don't respond to their calls. Don't negotiate. Just let the lease run out. Benita, if the IPO fails, Patrick's company could collapse. There are employees with families depending on those jobs. Then Patrick should have thought about that before he divorced his pregnant wife at her mother's funeral. Benita stood up. My mother gave him 9 years of below-market rent. She helped him build Wilson Tech by giving him a deal nobody else would have gotten. He never knew, never thanked her, never thought to ask who was being so generous. Now the generosity ends. Morrison stood as well. Understood. I'll continue the non-response strategy. They'll panic eventually. What do you want me to do when Patrick comes asking questions? Tell him nothing. Let him figure it out himself. Benita moved toward the door. then stopped. "Mr. Morrison, can Patrick find out who owns Nivola Holdings?" "Not easily. The trust structure is designed to protect your mother's privacy. A private investigator might eventually piece it together, but it would take time, more than 84 days. Morrison walked her to the elevator. "Your mother was brilliant. She spent 40 years building security for you. Don't waste it by being careless now." Bonita rode the elevator down alone. 19 floors of descent that felt like transformation. She'd entered this building as a broke single mother facing survival. She left it as a woman worth $800 million who owned the ground beneath her ex-husband's empire. The doors opened onto the lobby and she walked out into sunshine that suddenly felt different, warmer, brighter, full of possibility. Her phone buzzed. Text from Patrick's assistant. "Reminder, signed divorce papers due Monday by 5 p.m. Please confirm receipt." Bonita typed back, "Received." Then she walked to her car, drove back to her studio apartment, and started studying everything Morrison had given her. Property reports, lease agreements, market analyses, the language of commercial real estate that would become her second language over the next 84 days. That night, alone in her tiny apartment with Jack kicking against her ribs, Bonita whispered to her mother's memory, "I understand now, Mama. You weren't just leaving me money. You were leaving me power, and I promise you, I'm going to use it exactly the way you hoped I would." Outside her window, the city hummed with evening traffic. Somewhere out there, Patrick was celebrating his freedom with Gina. Somewhere out there, Wilson Tech's legal team was getting frustrated by Nivola Holdings' silence. Somewhere out there, consequences were gathering like storm clouds, and Bonita was done running from storms. She was learning to become one. Chapter 3. The Silent Preparation. Morning sickness hit Bonita at her desk on a Tuesday while she was analyzing logistics data for a company that shipped auto parts across the Midwest. She barely made it to the bathroom before throwing up her breakfast, cheap toast, and cheaper coffee. When she came back to her cubicle, her supervisor Laura was waiting with ginger tea and concern. "You okay, honey? You look terrible." Bonita did look terrible. That was intentional. No makeup, hair in a messy bun, wearing maternity clothes from the clearance rack at Target. The woman who used to blow-dry her hair and wear lipstick to work had disappeared. In her place was this exhausted, pregnant, abandoned version that everyone pitied. "Just morning sickness," Bonita said. "It's worse in the second trimester." Laura made sympathetic noises and returned to her office. Bonita opened her email and found another message from Morrison. "Wilson Tech Legal called 4 times yesterday. Left urgent voicemails. Should I continue non-response?" She typed back a single word, "Yes." Her work was genuine. She needed the job for cover, and because quitting suddenly would raise questions, so she analyzed data, attended meetings, ate sad desk lunches, and took the bus home every evening like someone barely holding their life together. Her co-workers probably thought she was one emergency away from complete breakdown. They had no idea she spent every evening studying commercial real estate law on her laptop, learning lease structures, understanding market rates, memorizing every detail of the 12 properties she now owned. Morrison had given her access to everything, and Bonita absorbed it like she used to absorb textbooks in college. Knowledge was power. Understanding was leverage. The Wilson Tech property fascinated her most. 4 acres purchased for $90,000 in 1981. Mama had been 32 then, working night shifts at the hospital, somehow saving enough to buy land nobody else wanted. The area had been industrial wasteland, full of warehouses and rail yards. Over 4 decades, it transformed into prime commercial real estate worth millions. Patrick's company had approached Mama 9 years ago through a commercial realtor. Small tech startup, growing fast, needed headquarters space. Could they negotiate favorable terms? Mama had agreed to $50,000 monthly, a fraction of market rate. In return, she'd gotten a 10-year lease with specific terms that protected her ownership rights. That lease expired in 5 weeks. Patrick's IPO was scheduled for 7 weeks from now. The timing was lethal. Benita's phone rang, Patrick's name on the screen. She let it go to voicemail, then listened to the message. "Benita, I need to ask you something about your mother. Call me back." She didn't call back. Instead, she texted, "If this is about the divorce, contact your lawyer." Patrick replied immediately, "Not about divorce, about some properties. Did your mother own commercial real estate?" Her stomach clenched. He was starting to investigate, making connections. Benita typed carefully, "She had some rental houses. Why?" "Just checking on something for work. How's the pregnancy?" "Fine." The conversation ended there. Benita stared at her phone, mind racing. Patrick was getting suspicious. Morrison had warned this might happen. The key was staying calm, staying consistent, giving him nothing that contradicted the story of Mama as a working-class nurse with modest holdings. Her contractions started 3 weeks early on a Thursday night. Benita was eating ramen when the first pain hit, sharp enough to make her gasp. She called an ambulance because she had nobody to drive her. The paramedics were kind, asking about birth plans and support systems. She gave them Morrison's number as her emergency contact because he was the only person who knew the truth. Labor took 14 hours. 14 hours of pain in a hospital room that smelled like disinfectant and fear. Nurses checked on her between other patients. The anesthesiologist came eventually, bringing the blessed relief of an epidural. But mostly, Benita was alone with Jack and the crushing weight of bringing a child into the world without a partner. Her co-worker found Patrick's number in her phone and called him. Benita heard the nurse's side of the conversation. "Mr. Wilson, your wife is in labor at Methodist Hospital. Yes, she's asking for you. Room 412. Okay, I'll let her know." The nurse came back looking uncomfortable. "He said congratulations. He's sending a gift." Patrick didn't come. Not when Jack was born at 4 in the morning weighing 6 pounds and 7 ounces. Not when the nurses placed him on Benita's chest, his tiny face scrunched and red. Not when Benita held her son and sobbed because joy and grief and exhaustion had tangled into something she couldn't name. Morrison came instead, showed up at 7 in the morning with flowers and a stuffed elephant. He held Jack while Benita showered, her body wrecked and shaking. When she came back, Morrison was rocking the baby gently. "He's beautiful," Morrison said. "Strong, like his mother." Patrick didn't come. Benita took Jack back, his warmth against her chest feeling like the only real thing in the world. He texted congratulations. Morrison's face hardened. "That makes what comes next easier. Are you still committed?" "More than ever." The lease expires in 4 weeks. Patrick's team is panicking. They've offered $100,000 monthly for renewal. That's double what they're paying now. Morrison pulled out his phone and showed her the email. "Should I respond?" Benita looked at Jack sleeping in her arms. His father had sent a text message to acknowledge his birth. His grandmother had spent 40 years building security, so he'd never be vulnerable. The choice wasn't difficult. No response. Let them panic more. Morrison nodded and stood to leave. Rest. Recover. In 3 weeks, Patrick's world starts collapsing. You'll want your strength for that. After Morrison left, Benita's phone lit up with a text from Patrick. "Heard the baby came. Congrats. My assistant is sending a gift basket. Hope you're doing well." A gift basket for the birth of his son. Benita typed back, "His name is Jack." Then she blocked Patrick's number and focused on the tiny human depending on her for everything. The hospital discharged her after 2 days. She took an Uber home because she couldn't afford the ambulance ride back. The driver helped carry Jack's car seat upstairs to her studio apartment. Inside, nothing had changed. Still, the mattress on the floor, the mini fridge, the boxes she hadn't unpacked. But everything had changed. Jack was here. The 84-day countdown had 71 days remaining. And somewhere across the city, Patrick was living his perfect life without knowing it was built on sand that was already washing away. Benita set up Jack's bassinet next to her mattress, changed his diaper, fed him formula because her milk hadn't come in yet, watched him sleep with the intensity of someone memorizing something precious. This was her family now, her and Jack against everything. Her phone buzzed with an email from Morrison. Wilson Tech just offered $150,000 monthly for renewal, also hired a private investigator to research Nivola Holdings. The PI called asking about ownership structure. I declined to provide information. They're getting desperate. Good. Let them be desperate. Let Patrick feel the ground shifting beneath his expensive shoes. Let him understand what instability felt like when it came from outside his control. Benita pulled out her laptop and opened the documents Morrison had provided. She had 71 days until the divorce finalized, 71 days until Patrick's claim to her inheritance expired, 71 days to watch his world start cracking while she figured out how to be a mother and plan the future she was going to build from the ruins of their marriage. Jack made a small sound in his sleep. Benita reached over and touched his tiny hand. Your grandmother left us something incredible, baby. Not just money. Power. The power to never need anyone who doesn't deserve us. I'm going to teach you that. When you're old enough to understand, I'll tell you about the woman who worked night shifts and bought unwanted land and played a 40-year game so perfectly that nobody saw it coming. Outside her window, the city was waking up to another ordinary day. But for Benita, nothing about this day was ordinary. She'd given birth to her son while her ex-husband sent a text message. She owned $800 million in real estate while living in a studio apartment. She held the power to destroy Patrick's company while the world thought she was powerless. The contradiction didn't bother her. She'd learned something important. The best power was invisible power, the kind nobody saw until it was too late to defend against. Mama had taught her that by living it for 40 years. Now Benita would finish what her mother started, and Patrick would never see it coming until the moment it destroyed everything he'd built on land he never owned. Chapter 4. The Perfect Life. Gina's Instagram story showed her morning routine in the house that used to be Benita's home. Sunrise yoga in the renovated master bedroom, green smoothie in the kitchen with new marble countertops, outfit selection in the walk-in closet where Benita's clothes had hung for 8 years. Each story had a song, a filter, a caption designed to inspire her 2 million followers. This morning's caption, grateful for new chapters. Sometimes the universe removes obstacles to make room for blessings. The obstacle was Benita. The blessing was Patrick and his coming fortune. Gina's followers loved it. Comments flooded in praising her positive energy, her beautiful home, her perfect relationship. Nobody mentioned the pregnant ex-wife. Nobody asked uncomfortable questions. In Gina's version of reality, she'd simply found love with a successful man. Clean, simple, aspirational. Patrick sat at the breakfast bar scrolling through IPO documents while Gina posed for photos. He barely noticed her performance anymore. The engagement ring he'd given her, financed, not paid for, caught light as she adjusted her phone angle. She'd posted the proposal video 3 weeks ago, and it went viral. CEO boyfriend surprised me on the beach at sunset. The video had 5 million views. What those viewers didn't know, Patrick's company was drowning in debt. The IPO wasn't just about growth, it was about survival. Wilson Tech owed $400 million to creditors, banks, private investors. The public offering would raise $800 million, pay off debts, and make Patrick legitimately wealthy instead of just looking wealthy. If the IPO happened. His CFO David Reyes called at 8 in the morning. Patrick answered with irritation. What now? The headquarters situation is worse. Nivola Holdings still won't return calls. I had our lawyers send formal notices. Nothing. It's like they're deliberately ignoring us. David's voice carried stress Patrick had never heard before. The lease expires in 4 weeks. If we don't resolve this before the roadshow starts, investors will pull out. Patrick stood up, walking away from Gina's photo shoot. Find out who actually owns Nivola Holdings. I don't care what it costs. Hire forensic accountants if you need to. Someone owns this company and I need to know who. We already have a PI investigating. The ownership structure is complicated. Multiple layers of trusts and holding companies. It's designed to hide the actual owner. David paused. Patrick, this isn't random. Someone is deliberately stonewalling us. Have you pissed anyone off lately? Patrick thought about enemies. Competitors he'd crushed, employees he'd fired, business partners he'd outmaneuvered. The list was long. Half the tech industry probably hates me. Narrow it down. I'm serious, this feels personal. They're not even trying to negotiate, they're just letting the clock run out. David's typing came through the phone. I found something weird. The property owner's attorney is Raymond Morrison. Does that name mean anything to you? Morrison, Patrick said it slowly. I've heard it somewhere. Can't remember where. Well, he's refusing to provide any information about his client. Says ownership details are confidential. He's within his legal rights, but it's unusual for commercial real estate. Most landlords want to negotiate. David's frustration was obvious. We're offering triple what we currently pay, $150,000 monthly, and we're getting zero response, not rejection, just silence. Patrick paced his office. Through the window he could see the pool where Gina was now filming another story. What happens if we can't renew? We'd need to relocate headquarters in less than 4 weeks. There's no available space that meets IPO requirements. We'd have to delay the offering or cancel it entirely. David's voice dropped. If we cancel, creditors will demand immediate payment. We don't have the cash. We'd be bankrupt in 90 days. The weight of that reality made Patrick's chest tight. Everything he'd built could disappear because of a lease he'd taken for granted. He'd never even thought about it before. The headquarters was just there, part of the landscape, as permanent as the ground itself. Now the ground was disappearing. Keep trying to reach them, Patrick ordered. Offer $200,000 monthly. Offer to buy the property outright, whatever they want. He ended the call and pulled up the private investigator's contact. Time to push harder. At his desk, Patrick searched for Raymond Morrison. The law firm website was minimal, no client testimonials, no case listings, just a simple page stating they specialized in estate planning and property management for high-net-worth individuals. Patrick recognized that kind of discretion. These lawyers managed family fortunes and kept secrets. Why would an estate planning attorney be handling commercial real estate for a major tech company, unless the property owner was wealthy enough to need that level of privacy? Unless this wasn't business, it was personal. Patrick pulled up property records online. Nivola Holdings appeared on documents from the 1980s. The name nagged at him. Nivola. Where had he heard that name? His phone rang. Gina. Baby, the wedding planner needs to know about the venue deposit. It's $50,000 and she needs it this week to hold the date. Not now, Gina. But we need to confirm. The Tuscany villa won't wait forever. Her voice carried the petulance of someone used to getting what she wanted. The IPO is in 7 weeks. We should book everything now. The IPO might not happen. The words came out harsher than Patrick intended. Silence on the other end. Then, what do you mean might not happen? You said it was guaranteed. You said we were going to be billionaires. Nothing is guaranteed in business. There are complications. I'm handling them. Patrick rubbed his temples. Don't book anything yet. Wait until after the IPO closes. But all my followers are expecting wedding updates. I've been posting about it. I can't just stop. Gina's priority was clear. Her content calendar mattered more than his company's survival. Patrick ended the call without responding. He pulled up his text conversation with Bonita from yesterday. She'd said her mother owned rental houses, nothing commercial. But what if she was wrong? What if her mother had hidden the extent of her holdings the same way the owner of Nivola Holdings was hiding now? He called the private investigator. I need you to research someone. Theodora Nivola, Nivola. She died recently. Find out everything she owned. Properties, investments, businesses, everything. That's a change from researching Nivola Holdings. Are they connected? The PI asked. Maybe. Just find out. Patrick hung up and stared at his computer screen. Something was wrong. Something bigger than a landlord playing hardball. The silence felt strategic. The timing felt deliberate. And that name, Nivola, connected to Bonita in a way Patrick couldn't ignore. He pulled up photos from their wedding 8 years ago. Bonita in a simple white dress, smiling like she'd won the lottery by marrying him. Her mother beside her, proud and elegant in a conservative navy suit. Theodora Nivola, a nurse who'd worked night shifts for 30 years. But nurses didn't usually hire attorneys like Raymond Morrison, and rental house owners didn't usually structure their holdings through complex trust arrangements. What if Bonita's mother had been more than she appeared? Patrick's phone buzzed with an email from David. Just got unofficial word from the investment banks. If we can't provide confirmed headquarters by the roadshow start date, they're withdrawing. We have 3 weeks. 3 weeks. Patrick felt the walls closing in. His company, his fortune, his future, all dependent on a landlord who wouldn't answer calls and a lease he'd taken for granted. The universe was removing obstacles, all right, but Patrick was the one being removed. He looked out at Gina by the pool, filming another story about gratitude and blessings. She had no idea how precarious their situation was. She thought they'd already won. She'd quit her training job, hired a manager for her Instagram career, started spending money they didn't have yet. Patrick had built his entire life on leverage and confidence. He'd borrowed against future success to live like he'd already made it. And now the future was collapsing while the debt came due. The perfect life he'd been performing was built on credit cards and expectations, and someone was pulling the foundation out from under him one day at a time. His phone rang again. The private investigator. "Mr. Wilson, I have preliminary information on Theodora Nivola. You're going to want to hear this." Patrick's grip tightened on the phone. "Tell me." Chapter 5. The First Crack. The private investigator's report landed in Patrick's email at 7 in the morning with a subject line that made his stomach drop. Urgent, Nivola Family Holdings Analysis. He opened it while still in bed, Gina sleeping beside him after a late night planning wedding details for an event that might never happen. The first page showed a property list, not rental houses, commercial land across 3 states, acquisition dates starting in the 1970s, current valuations in the hundreds of millions, and at the bottom a note from the PI, all properties owned through various trusts with one common beneficiary, estate of Theodora Nivola, inherited by daughter Bonita Nivola Wilson. Patrick read that line 5 times. Bonita, his pregnant ex-wife, living in a studio apartment. Bonita who took the bus to work and ate ramen for dinner. Bonita who he'd divorced because she'd stopped being attractive enough for his image. That Bonita owned hundreds of millions in commercial real estate. The next page showed a timeline. Theodora Nivola died 6 days before Patrick filed for divorce. The estate transferred to Bonita immediately, which meant Bonita had inherited while still married, which meant community property law applied. Patrick could claim half. But the report included a legal analysis that made his hands shake. Texas required asset disclosure within 90 days of divorce filing. Bonita had 81 days remaining. If she could hide the inheritance until day 91, it became hers alone. Patrick had exactly 81 days to prove she'd inherited during the marriage and file a claim. He kept reading. The Wilson Tech headquarters sat on Nivola property. Houston office sat on Nivola property. Phoenix data center sat on Nivola property. 3 of Patrick's 4 major facilities built on land Bonita's mother owned. Land Bonita now owned. Patrick threw his phone across the room. The crash woke Gina, who sat up confused. "What's wrong?" "Everything." Patrick got out of bed and pulled on clothes. "My ex-wife owns the land under my company. She's been hiding it. She's deliberately not renewing my leases to tank the IPO." Gina blinked slowly, processing. "Your ex-wife is rich?" "Her mother was rich. Bonita inherited everything, and she's using it to destroy me." Patrick grabbed his keys. "I need to call my lawyer." "Wait, if she inherited while you were married, don't you get half?" Gina was awake now, her financial interest clearly engaged. "Maybe. If I can prove it and file in time." Patrick was already heading for the door. "But even if I get half, she still controls the properties. She can still refuse to renew my leases. She can still kill the IPO." He drove to the office and found David already there, looking like he hadn't slept. "You saw the PI report," David said. "Not a question. Bonita owns everything. The woman I divorced at her mother's funeral owns the ground I built my company on." Patrick laughed, a sound with no humor in it. "She's been living in a studio apartment pretending to be broke while sitting on hundreds of millions. She's been hiding it from the asset disclosure deadline." David pulled up the timeline on his screen. "Smart move. In 81 days, she's untouchable, but right now, you can still claim half. The question is whether claiming half helps us or makes everything worse." Patrick sat down heavily. "If I sue her for the inheritance, she'll definitely refuse to renew the leases." "Correct. But if you don't sue her, you lose $400 million. David turned his chair to face Patrick directly. "Here's the reality. Even if you get the money, if the IPO fails, we're still bankrupt. The inheritance claim takes months to resolve. We have 3 weeks to save the company. You need to choose. Go after the money or go after the business. You can't have both." The calculation should have been simple. Save the company, forget the money. But Patrick had spent his entire life optimizing for personal gain, had made every decision based on what benefited him most. The habit was hard to break, even when logic demanded it. "What if I call her?" Patrick suggested. "Apologize, negotiate. She's angry about the divorce, but she's not evil. She wouldn't deliberately destroy hundreds of jobs just to hurt me." David's expression was unreadable. "Patrick, you divorced her at her mother's funeral while she was 7 months pregnant. Then you sued her to try and take half of what her mother left her. You're past the negotiation stage. She's not refusing to renew your leases because she's angry. She's refusing because you've proven you can't be trusted." Patrick pulled out his phone and called Bonita anyway. The call went straight to voicemail. "Bonita, it's Patrick. I know about the inheritance. I know you own the properties. We need to talk. Please call me back. This isn't just about us. There are hundreds of people who could lose their jobs. Call me." He ended the message and waited. His phone stayed silent. At 8:30, his divorce attorney called. "Patrick, I got your email about the inheritance. I need to advise you against filing a claim right now." "Why? I'm entitled to half. Community property law is clear." "The law is clear, but the strategy is terrible," the attorney said bluntly. "If you file, you're declaring war on the one person who controls your company's real estate. She'll evict you immediately. The IPO dies. The company goes bankrupt. You'll spend years in court fighting over assets that might not exist anymore because the company they came from collapsed. So I just let her keep $400 million that's legally mine. You let her keep it until the company is stable. Save the business first. Fight the money battle later." The attorney paused. "Patrick, I'm going to be honest with you. This is the consequence of divorcing your pregnant wife at her mother's funeral. The optics are catastrophic. No judge is going to be sympathetic. No jury will side with you. If this goes to court, you lose both the inheritance and whatever public reputation you have left." Patrick ended the call and stared at his computer screen. Every option led to loss. Sue Bonita and lose the company. Don't sue Bonita and lose the money. Try to negotiate and face the woman he'd betrayed in the cruelest possible way. David's phone rang. He answered, listened, then went pale. "That was Morrison's law firm. We just received formal notice. All 3 leases will not be renewed. We have 30 days to vacate all properties. No negotiation, no discussion." Patrick felt the floor disappear beneath him. "She's evicting us. She's destroying us." David put his phone down carefully. "This isn't business. This is revenge, and she's doing it legally, completely within her rights as property owner. I need to see her, face to face. She has to listen to reason." Patrick stood up. "She doesn't have to do anything," David said quietly. "You made sure of that when you handed her divorce papers at her mother's grave. Now she's handing you eviction notices. The symmetry is almost poetic." Patrick's phone buzzed. Text from an unknown number. "Stop calling. Stop texting. I have nothing to say to you. My attorney will handle all future communication regarding the properties. Regarding everything else, We're done. You made sure of that. Bonita. He stared at the message. She'd blocked his regular number, so he'd tried from the office line. Now she was blocking that too. He was being systematically cut off from any way to reach her. David was already on his phone with the investment banks. Patrick heard fragments of the conversation. 30-day eviction notice. Yes, all 3 facilities. No confirmed alternative locations. Understand your position. When David hung up, his face told Patrick everything. The banks are withdrawing. The IPO is cancelled. We're done. How long until bankruptcy? 90 days, maybe less. David started shutting down his computer. You should tell the staff. They deserve to know before the news breaks publicly. Patrick walked through the office looking at people working at their desks, engineers writing code, salespeople on calls with clients, the office manager updating the kitchen supplies, all of them building careers on a foundation that was dissolving, all of them about to lose their jobs because Patrick had been too arrogant to understand that actions had consequences. His phone buzzed again. Gina. Wedding planner needs an answer about the deposit. Should I book Tuscany? Patrick typed back, No, don't book anything. I'll explain later. The response came immediately. Are you cancelling our wedding? He didn't reply. He walked back to his office, closed the door, and sat in the dark, thinking about the moment he'd handed Bonita those divorce papers. How simple it had seemed. How clean. A transaction. An ending. A new beginning with Gina and the IPO and the fortune that was waiting just around the corner. But there had been another woman standing there that day. A woman he'd never seen. A woman who'd inherited her mother's intelligence and patience and willingness to play the long game. A woman who understood that the best revenge was the kind that looked like justice. Patrick had divorced Bonita thinking she was powerless. He was learning the hard way that power wasn't always visible. Sometimes it was hidden under 40 years of modest living and strategic land purchases. Sometimes it was waiting patiently for the exact right moment to reveal itself and remake the world. That moment had arrived, and Patrick was learning what it felt like to be the one who got discarded. Chapter 6. The Reveal. Morrison's conference room felt colder than it had during Bonita's first visit, or maybe Patrick just felt cold. He sat alone at the long table waiting, trying not to look desperate even though desperation was the only thing keeping him upright. David had wanted to come, but Patrick refused. This conversation needed to happen without witnesses. The door opened. Not Morrison. Bonita. Patrick hadn't seen her since the funeral. She'd been visibly pregnant then, swollen and exhausted, wearing a dress that didn't fit right. The woman who walked in now looked completely different. Slimmer but not weak, hair styled professionally, wearing a black suit that probably cost more than Patrick's car payment. She moved with certainty, like someone who owned rooms rather than borrowed space in them. Hello, Patrick. Her voice carried no emotion. Not anger, not satisfaction, just neutrality that somehow felt worse than rage. Bonita, thank you for agreeing to meet with me. Patrick started to stand, but she waved him back down. I didn't agree to anything. Morrison said you'd been calling non-stop and showing up at his office. I came to tell you in person to stop. She sat across from him, leaving empty chairs between them like a buffer zone. You have 3 minutes. Use them well. I need you to renew the leases. I'll pay whatever rate you want. Market rate, double market rate, anything. The company can't survive without those facilities. Patrick heard himself begging and hated it but had no choice. 300 people work for Wilson Tech. They have families, mortgages, car payments. They didn't do anything wrong. Please don't make them pay for my mistakes. Bonita pulled out her phone and set a timer. 2 minutes left. I know I hurt you. I know the divorce was cruel. The timing was unconscionable. I was focused on the IPO and on myself, and I didn't consider what you were going through with your mother. The apology tasted like ashes. I'm sorry, truly, but destroying my company won't change what happened. It just creates more suffering. 1 minute. Bonita looked at her nails, not at him. What do you want? Tell me what you want and I'll give it to you. Money, ownership stake in the company, public apology, anything. Name your price. Patrick was fully begging now, all pretense of dignity gone. The timer went off. Benita stood up. Time's up. Wait, please, just tell me what you want. She finally looked directly at him. Her eyes were empty of anything resembling mercy. I don't want anything from you, Patrick. That's what you don't understand. There's nothing you can offer me that I need. I have more money than I'll ever spend. I have a son who's healthy and happy. I have a future that doesn't include you. So no, I won't renew your leases. Not at market rate, not at any rate. You're willing to destroy hundreds of jobs for revenge? Patrick's voice rose. That's who you want to be? Those jobs will be fine. I'm buying Wilson Tech's assets from the bankruptcy trustee. I'll rehire every competent employee at better salaries with better benefits. What I won't keep is you. She moved toward the door. The company you built will continue without you. The technology will survive. The employees will survive. Only you will lose. That's precise revenge, not collateral damage. Patrick felt reality crushing down on him. You can't do this. I'll fight you in court. I'll claim half the inheritance. I'll drag this out for years. Go ahead. My lawyers are better than yours and I can afford them longer than you can. Benita paused at the door. You filed for divorce while my mother's body was still warm. You moved your mistress into our home before the funeral. You sued me to try and steal what my mother built. You signed away your rights to your own son to avoid child support. And now you're asking me for mercy. I made mistakes. You made choices. Multiple choices every single day that showed me exactly who you are. Her voice finally carried emotion, not rage, but something colder, finality. I'm not your villain, Patrick. I'm just the person who stopped being your victim. And apparently that's the same thing to men like you. She opened the door. Patrick stood up, desperate to say something that would change her mind. Benita, please, I'm begging you. If there's any part of you that remembers what we had, any part that doesn't hate me completely, I don't hate you. She looked back one final time. I don't feel anything about you at all. You're just someone I used to know who made terrible choices. And now you get to live with those choices while I live with mine. Goodbye, Patrick. She walked out. Morrison appeared in the doorway, his expression professionally blank. Mr. Wilson, I need to ask you to leave the premises. If you attempt to contact my client again, we'll pursue a restraining order. Patrick grabbed his coat and stumbled toward the elevator. In the reflection of the steel doors, he saw what he'd become. Not the confident CEO in designer suits, just a desperate man who'd gambled everything on his own importance and lost. He drove back to the house in a daze. Gina's car was in the driveway, along with a moving truck. He walked inside and found her directing movers who were carrying furniture toward the truck. Her clothes were already packed, her toiletries gone from the bathroom. What are you doing? Patrick asked, though he knew. I can't do this. Gina didn't stop supervising the movers. I saw the news. Wilson Tech IPO cancelled. Your company is bankrupt. Everything I thought we had doesn't exist. We still have each other. Patrick, I'm 25 years old. I have 2 million followers and brand partnerships and a whole future ahead of me. I can't tie myself to someone who's about to lose everything. She finally looked at him. You told me you were about to be a billionaire. You're actually about to be bankrupt. That's fraud, basically. I believed the IPO would happen. I didn't lie to you. You lied to yourself and expected me to participate in the delusion. Gina signaled to a mover to take her clothes. I'm sorry this happened to you. I really am. But I can't be with someone who's broke. That's not the life I want. So you're leaving? I already left. I'm just clearing out my stuff. She walked past him toward the door. For what it's worth, you shouldn't have divorced your pregnant wife at her mother's funeral. Everyone said you were cruel. I defended you because I thought you were successful enough that cruelty didn't matter. Turns out you're cruel and unsuccessful. That's the worst combination. She left. The movers followed with the last of her belongings. Patrick stood in the house that was technically still his, but wouldn't be for long. The bank would foreclose. Creditors would seize assets. Everything he'd accumulated over 15 years would be liquidated to pay debts he couldn't cover. His phone started buzzing. News alerts. Tech blogs had the story. Wilson Tech founder loses company after landlord refuses lease renewal. Patrick Wilson's billion-dollar IPO dreams collapse. CEO's ex-wife owns land under his headquarters, refuses to renew. Someone had connected the dots. Someone had found out Bonita owned Nivola Holdings. The story was irresistible. Rich CEO divorces, pregnant wife at funeral, wife turns out to be wealthier, destroys CEO's company. The internet was going to feast on this for weeks. Patrick's phone rang, his mother. He let it go to voicemail, then his sister, then college friends he hadn't spoken to in years. Everyone wanting to know if the stories were true, everyone having opinions about choices he couldn't undo. He opened Instagram and found Gina had already posted a photo of her in sunglasses, sitting in what looked like a private jet. Caption, "Sometimes you have to let go of what you thought you wanted to make space for what you deserve. New chapter." Comments praising her strength, her wisdom, her ability to dodge a bullet. Patrick was the bullet, the thing people congratulated themselves for avoiding. He sat down in the empty living room and opened his laptop, pulled up his company email, started drafting a message to all staff. "Dear Wilson Tech team, it is with deep regret that I inform you." He stopped. What could he possibly say that would make any of this better? He closed the laptop and sat in silence as the sun set through his floor-to-ceiling windows. This house would be gone soon. The car would be repossessed. The bank accounts would be seized. Everything he'd built on leverage and confidence was collapsing because the foundation had never been his. It had belonged to a woman who'd worked night shifts and bought land nobody wanted and played a game so long and patient that Patrick hadn't seen it coming until it crushed him. His phone buzzed one more time. Text from Morrison's office. Not personal, automated. "This message confirms Wilson Tech assets will be sold to Nivola Technologies for $5 million. Transaction completes in 15 days. $5 million for a company that had been worth hundreds of millions." Patrick laughed until he couldn't breathe. Bonita was buying his life's work for the cost of a nice house. She was erasing him efficiently, legally, completely. And the worst part was knowing he'd done this to himself. Every choice, every cruelty, every moment he'd chosen image over substance and confidence over character. He'd built his empire on borrowed ground and borrowed time, and now both had run out. Patrick sat in his empty house as darkness fell and understood what Bonita had known all along. Revenge wasn't about making someone suffer. It was about letting them suffer from their own choices while you moved on to something better. She didn't need to destroy him. She just needed to stop saving him. And that had been enough. Chapter 7. The Unraveling. The news cycle devoured Patrick like he was content created specifically for viral outrage. Tech bro gets karma became a hashtag. Funeral divorce guy loses everything trended on Twitter for 3 days. Someone made a TikTok explaining the whole story in 60 seconds that got 17 million views. Patrick became a meme, a cautionary tale, a villain in a morality play everyone enjoyed because his suffering felt deserved. Business magazines ran features. The spectacular fall of Patrick Wilson. How pride preceded a billion-dollar collapse. The CEO who built his empire on borrowed ground. Every article mentioned the funeral, the pregnancy, Gina, the inheritance. Private details became public entertainment. Patrick's humiliation was complete and permanent, preserved forever in digital archives that would outlive him. The bankruptcy filing happened on a grey Tuesday morning. Patrick signed papers that transferred control of Wilson Tech to a trustee who would liquidate assets to pay creditors. He lost his office, his title, his stake in the company he'd founded. The trustee was efficient and merciless, selling everything that had value and discarding everything that didn't. Patrick's value was zero. Within a week, Nivola Technologies purchased the assets, $5 million, a rounding error to Bonita, a fortune Patrick didn't have. The technology patents, client contracts, even the Wilson Tech name itself. Everything he'd created for 15 years now belonged to his ex-wife, who'd renamed it and rebuilt it without him in less time than he'd taken to destroy it. The house went into foreclosure. Patrick had 30 days to vacate. He spent them packing boxes and watching creditors seize furniture, artwork, appliances. They took his bed, his couch, his TV. They took kitchen equipment he'd never used and decorative items Gina had bought. By the end, Patrick had 4 boxes of personal items and nowhere to put them. His friend Tommy offered a guest room. It was charity and they both knew it. Patrick moved in with his 4 boxes and tried to remember what normal people's lives looked like. Tommy's house was fine, suburban, modest, the kind of place Patrick would have looked down on 2 months ago. Now it felt like a luxury Patrick didn't deserve. Employment opportunities were limited. Patrick's name was toxic. Nobody wanted to hire the CEO whose company collapsed spectacularly, who'd become a cautionary tale about arrogance and karma. He finally found work at a sales firm selling enterprise software. The salary was $78,000, less than he'd paid his junior employees. His wages would be garnished 25% for decades to pay creditor judgments. He'd take home less than $60,000 annually. $60,000. Patrick used to spend that on watches. Now it was his salary, his life, his future. Gina's Instagram showed her new relationship within 3 weeks of leaving. Some cryptocurrency entrepreneur who'd made millions on speculation. They were in Dubai, staying in 7-star hotels, dining at restaurants that required reservations 6 months in advance. Gina looked happy, glowing, exactly like she'd looked with Patrick. Love was interchangeable for her. Partners were accessories. She'd found a richer version and upgraded seamlessly. Her followers loved the new relationship. Comments praised her for moving on, for choosing happiness, for not letting Patrick's failure dim her light. Nobody called her a gold digger. Nobody questioned the timing. She'd curated her narrative perfectly. She was the girl who dodged a bullet, not the woman who'd abandoned a sinking ship. Patrick's lawyer bills arrived weekly. Debt from the failed inheritance claim, bankruptcy proceedings, creditor negotiations. The total was approaching $300,000. Patrick had agreed to a payment plan that would take him 10 years to clear. 10 years of his already garnished salary going toward lawyers who'd failed to save him from himself. His mother called every few days with increasingly worried questions. Are you eating? Are you sleeping? Have you thought about therapy? Patrick gave non-committal answers and ended the calls as quickly as possible. He couldn't explain to her that therapy wouldn't fix this. Some mistakes were too large for processing and healing. Some consequences just had to be lived with. The lawsuits kept coming. Private investors who'd lost money when the IPO collapsed sued Patrick personally for fraud and misrepresentation. They claimed he'd known about the real estate situation and hadn't disclosed it. The suits were baseless but expensive to defend. Patrick's lawyer negotiated settlements he couldn't afford, spreading his debt further into a future that looked increasingly grim. He tried calling Bonita one last time from a burner phone. She answered, said, "Leave me alone," and hung up before he could respond. He texted from the same number. "I just want to know how Jack is doing. I signed away my rights, but I still think about him." Her response came hours later. "Jack is perfect. He's loved and safe, and you are not part of his life by your own choice. Do not contact me again. This number is now blocked." Patrick looked at that message until his eyes blurred. His son was growing up without him, would never know him, would someday ask about his father, and Bonita would tell him the truth, that Patrick had signed away his parental rights to avoid child support, that he'd chosen to erase Jack rather than face responsibility. The truth was worse than any lie Bonita could have told. Tommy found Patrick sitting in the guest room at 2 in the morning, staring at nothing. "You okay, man?" "No, but I will be eventually. I have to be." Patrick looked at his friend. "You ever make a choice you can't undo? Something so stupid, so cruel, that you'd give anything to go back and choose differently?" Everyone has regrets. This isn't regret. This is knowing I destroyed my own life and hurt people who didn't deserve it, and I can never fix any of it. Patrick's voice cracked. I divorced my pregnant wife at her mother's funeral. Who does that? What kind of person am I? Tommy didn't answer, because there was no good answer. Patrick was the kind of person who'd done that. That truth was permanent. The months crawled forward. Patrick went to work, did his job adequately but not exceptionally, came home to Tommy's guest room. He existed in the space between who he'd been and who he'd become. The confident CEO was gone. The man who replaced him was smaller, quieter, haunted by choices that followed him everywhere. He saw Bonita's name in business news occasionally, Nivola Technologies landing major contracts, Bonita speaking at tech conferences, the company valued at $800 million and growing. She'd done in 1 year what had taken Patrick 15, and she'd done it without the arrogance and cruelty that had defined his approach. She'd proven that success didn't require ruthlessness. It required competence and integrity, qualities Patrick had mistaken for weakness. On what would have been his wedding day in Tuscany, Patrick sat in the guest room scrolling through photos from his engagement to Gina. They looked happy, but the happiness had been performance. Neither of them had loved each other. They'd loved what the other represented. Gina loved his money and status. Patrick loved how she made him look. When those things disappeared, so did the love. Bonita had loved him once, really loved him. Patrick remembered moments early in their relationship when she'd looked at him like he hung the moon. She'd believed in him when Wilson Tech was just an idea. She'd supported him through early failures. She'd been his partner in building something real, and Patrick had thrown that away when her body changed and her attention shifted to her dying mother. He'd chosen appearance over substance and lost everything that mattered. Tommy knocked on the door. Hey, there's a woman at the door asking for you, says her name is Teresa. Patrick went downstairs and found a woman he didn't recognize. She was around 40, dressed professionally, holding a folder. Mr. Wilson, I'm Teresa Hammond. I work at a non-profit that helps displaced tech workers. I heard about your situation and wanted to offer resources. I have a job, I don't need help. Not employment help, legal advocacy. We're building a class action against Wilson Tech's bankruptcy proceedings. Several employees believe they're owed severance that wasn't paid. They want to sue you personally. Teresa's expression was kind, but firm. I'm here to give you advance notice. The suit will be filed next week. More lawsuits, more debt, more consequences that would follow Patrick for the rest of his life. How much are they asking for? $15 million in collective claims. Teresa handed him the folder. I know you don't have that money. Nobody expects you to pay the full amount, but the judgment will be public record. It's about acknowledgement that you failed these people. Patrick took the folder without opening it. Is that all? Actually, there's something else. One of the women involved in the suit is named Bonita Nivola. She's representing the employees pro bono, funding their legal costs. Teresa watched Patrick's face. I thought you should know before you find out in court. Bonita was suing him, not for herself. She didn't need the money. She was suing him on behalf of the employees he'd failed. One final demonstration that she cared about people he'd treated as disposable. One final reminder that she was everything he wasn't. Patrick closed the door after Teresa left. He went back to the guest room and sat on the borrowed bed in the borrowed room in the borrowed life he was living. Everything he had now was borrowed or taken from others' generosity. He owned nothing, was nothing, had been reduced to nothing by a woman he'd underestimated so completely that his punishment was total. The unraveling was complete. Patrick had lost his company, his money, his home, his reputation, his son, his future. What remained was just the outline of a person who'd once been important, and somehow that was worse than being nothing, being the ghost of something better, being the before photo in everyone else's story about karma and consequences. Patrick lay back on the bed and stared at the ceiling. Tomorrow he'd go to work and pretend to care about software sales. Tomorrow he'd make payments on debts that would outlive him. Tomorrow he'd exist in the shadow of his former life, but tonight He just felt tired. Tired of being the villain. Tired of living with choices he couldn't undo. Tired of waiting for something that felt like redemption that was never coming. Because Benita had been right. She wasn't his villain. She was just the person who'd stopped being his victim, and that was worse than any revenge she could have planned. She'd simply stepped aside and let him drown in the consequences of his own actions. No dramatic confrontations, no ongoing vengeance, just silence and distance while he learned what it meant to lose everything that wasn't real to begin with. Chapter 8. The Empire She Builds. Benita's first day as CEO of Millionaire Technologies started with her son vomiting on her blouse 20 minutes before the board meeting. Jack was teething, miserable and clingy. The nanny Sophie tried to take him, but he screamed and reached for Benita with desperate hands. So Benita changed into the spare blouse she'd learned to keep in her office, held Jack until he calmed down, and walked into the boardroom 15 minutes late carrying a baby on her hip. "Apologies for the delay," she said, setting Jack's carrier on the conference table. "Teething emergency. Now, let's discuss the acquisition integration strategy." The board members, men in their 50s who'd built careers on punctuality and professional boundaries, looked uncertain. Then David Reyes, her new COO, pulled out his phone and showed Jack a video of singing vegetables. Jack immediately stopped fussing and stared transfixed at the screen. Crisis managed. "The integration is ahead of schedule," David reported, pulling up spreadsheets. "We've retained 87% of Wilson Tech's workforce. Employee satisfaction is up 40 points since the ownership change. Client retention is 96%, which is exceptional for a company emerging from bankruptcy." Benita reviewed the numbers with one eye on Jack, who was now babbling at the vegetable song. "What about the toxic performers, the ones who were technically good but culturally destructive?" "Terminated with severance. 14 people total. Everyone else got salary increases between 15 and 30%. Turns out paying people well and treating them with respect dramatically improves performance." David smiled. Revolutionary concept. The meeting continued for 2 hours, covering expansion plans, client acquisitions, technology development. Jack fell asleep halfway through, his small body warm against Benita's shoulder. She presented quarterly projections while holding her son, answered questions about R&D budgets while rocking him gently. Nobody commented on the unconventional setup. They'd learned quickly that Benita didn't separate motherhood from leadership. Both were part of who she was. After the meeting, Benita took Jack downstairs to the company daycare she'd established. 60 children of employees, ages 6 weeks to 5 years, playing in bright rooms with trained teachers. The daycare cost Millionaire Technologies $300,000 annually, but saved parents tens of thousands each in childcare costs. The ROI wasn't financial, it was loyalty and productivity, and the knowledge that people worked better when they weren't worried about their children. "He's such a good baby," one of the teachers said, taking Jack from Benita. "Never fussy, always smiling." Benita looked at her son, 8 months old now, with dark curls and her mother's expressive eyes. "He's perfect, absolutely perfect." She kissed his forehead. "Mama has meetings all afternoon. Sophie will pick you up at 5. I love you, baby." Jack babbled something that might have been mama or might have been random sounds. Benita chose to believe it was intentional and left before the separation anxiety made her cry. Her office occupied the top floor with windows overlooking the city. The space was nothing like Patrick's old office with its glass walls and performative transparency. Benita had chosen solid walls, a door that closed, furniture that prioritized comfort over image. Her desk held photos of Jack, her mother, the house she'd bought in a neighborhood with good schools and safe streets. This office reflected who she was, not who she wanted others to think she was. David knocked and entered with news. 3 acquisition offers came in this week, tech companies wanting to buy Millionaire Technologies. Valuations range from $400 million to $500 million. He handed her the formal proposals. "That's 100 times return on your initial investment in 8 months." Benita barely glanced at the offers. "Not interested. We're not building an exit strategy. We're building something permanent. Tell anyone who asks that Millionaire Technologies is not for sale at any price. That's what I expected you to say. Just wanted to confirm. David sat down. I ran into Patrick last week at a sales conference. He was working a booth for some enterprise software company. Bonita felt nothing at the news. No curiosity, no sympathy, no satisfaction. Just acknowledgement that Patrick existed somewhere doing something. How did he look? Tired? Smaller somehow. He asked about you, about Jack. I didn't tell him anything. David paused. He said to tell you he's sorry for everything. He's apologized before. The words don't change anything. Bonita signed the acquisition rejections. Patrick made his choices, I made mine. His choices led to him selling software. Mine led to this. She gestured at the office, the company, the life she'd built. I hope he finds some peace eventually, but his peace isn't my responsibility. That evening, Bonita went home to the 4-bedroom house that felt like a sanctuary. Sophie had Jack in the playroom, surrounded by blocks and stuffed animals. James was in the kitchen, cooking something that smelled like garlic and herbs. He'd started staying over most nights after 6 months of dating, and domesticity had developed naturally between them. How was the board meeting? James asked, stirring sauce on the stove. He was a pediatric surgeon, brilliant and humble, more interested in saving children's lives than impressing anyone. Bonita had met him at a hospital fundraiser, and they'd clicked immediately over shared values rather than shared ambitions. Good. Jack threw up on me right before, so I started 15 minutes late carrying a baby. Nobody complained. Bonita opened wine for herself, sparkling water for James, who was on call later. 3 acquisition offers this week, all rejected. Because you're building something that lasts, James said, exactly understanding her thinking, not something that sells. Exactly. Bonita watched Jack through the doorway, completely absorbed in stacking blocks. My mother spent 40 years building security. I'm not going to sell it for quick profit. I'm going to build on what she started and leave something even better for Jack. James turned off the stove and pulled Bonita close. You're extraordinary. You know that, right? The way you've transformed tragedy into triumph. The way you lead with integrity. The way you're raising Jack while running a company. It's remarkable. I'm just doing what Mama taught me. Build slow, build strong, build something real. Bonita rested her head on James's chest. Patrick used to say I had no ambition because I wasn't ruthless enough. Turns out I had a different kind of ambition. The kind that creates value instead of extracting it. Dinner was simple and perfect. James's pasta, salad from their garden, Jack in his high chair making a mess with cut-up vegetables. Normal family evening, exactly what Bonita had craved when she was pregnant and alone. This scene, messy and real and full of love, was worth more than any IPO or acquisition or magazine cover. After Jack was asleep, Bonita worked from home while James studied surgical journals. This was their rhythm. Both ambitious, both dedicated, both supporting each other without competition or resentment. James understood that Bonita's company required attention, and he never made her feel guilty for working evenings. Bonita understood that James's patience required his focus, and she never complained when he got called away mid-dinner. Her phone buzzed with an email from a business magazine requesting an interview. They wanted to profile her success story, the woman who'd transformed a bankrupt company into something valuable. Bonita almost declined. She didn't need publicity, but she thought about the message it would send. Woman builds empire. Woman does it ethically. Woman proves you don't have to be cruel to succeed. She accepted the interview with conditions. No questions about Patrick except basic facts, focus on the company and employees, honest discussion about challenges of being a working mother. The journalist agreed, and they scheduled for the following week. The interview room at Millionaire Technologies had windows overlooking the city where Bonita had once ridden buses to a job that barely paid rent. The journalist, a woman named Daphne, set up her recorder and started with softball questions. Company history, acquisition strategy, growth projections. Then she shifted to what she really wanted to know. Your ex-husband built this company originally. How does it feel to now own what he created? Benita had prepared for this question. Patrick built the technology and client base. That was valuable and I kept it. But the culture he created was toxic. High turnover, unhappy employees, unsustainable growth targets. I didn't just acquire assets. I rebuilt the foundation. The company that exists now is fundamentally different from what Patrick created. Some people online call this revenge. Do you see it that way? No. Revenge would have been destroying the company and ensuring Patrick suffered as much as possible. What I did was save the valuable parts and discard what didn't work. That's business, not revenge. Benita leaned forward. People want this to be a story about a woman punishing a man who wronged her, but it's actually a story about a woman building something better than what existed before. Those are different narratives. Daphne nodded, typing notes. You've been very successful very quickly. What's your advice for other women in tech? Competence compounds. Integrity attracts talent. You don't have to be the smartest person in the room if you hire smart people and actually listen to them. Benita thought about what else mattered. Also, don't confuse confidence with competence. Patrick was supremely confident and marginally competent. I'm moderately confident and highly competent. One of those approaches builds lasting value. The interview continued for another hour. Daphne asked about motherhood and leadership, about being a woman CEO in a male-dominated industry, about the challenges of acquiring a company while raising an infant. Benita answered honestly, sharing struggles and solutions without pretending everything was easy. When the article published 2 weeks later, it went viral. Not because of drama or controversy, but because it offered something rare, a success story built on kindness and competence rather than ruthlessness and ego. Women shared it with comments like, "This is the leadership we need," and, "Finally, someone proving you don't have to be cruel to succeed." The article attracted talent. Nivola Technologies received thousands of job applications from people who wanted to work for someone like Benita. The company grew. Not explosively. Benita refused to prioritize growth over sustainability, but steadily and healthily. Revenue increased. Employee satisfaction stayed high. Client retention remained exceptional. The metrics that actually mattered all pointed in the right direction. Jack's first birthday party was held in the backyard of their home. 30 people, employees who'd become friends, neighbors, Sophie, Mrs. Okoye, James's family. Simple decorations, homemade cake, Jack sitting in his high chair, smashing cupcakes while everyone sang. The kind of celebration that cost money, but was fundamentally about love rather than performance. Benita looked around at people who'd shown up because they genuinely cared. Not because of her success or wealth or status, because they loved Jack and supported her and wanted to be part of their life. This was family. This was what mattered. This was what Patrick had traded away for an Instagram girlfriend and an IPO that never happened. That night, after guests left and Jack was asleep, Benita sat on the back porch with James watching stars appear in the darkening sky. A year ago today, I was giving birth alone in a hospital because Patrick couldn't be bothered to show up. Now I have all of this. How did that happen? You made it happen. James took her hand. You took the worst circumstances and built something beautiful from them. That's not luck, that's strength. I had help. Mama left me the resources. Morrison guided me legally. You've been here supporting me. David runs the company with me. Sophie takes care of Jack. I didn't do this alone. No, but you could have done nothing. You could have just taken the money and lived quietly. Instead, you transformed a tragedy into triumph. You saved hundreds of jobs. You built something meaningful. James pulled her close. You're extraordinary, Benita, and I love you for exactly who you are. Benita leaned into him, feeling safe and whole. She thought about Patrick briefly, not with anger or satisfaction, just with distant acknowledgement that he existed somewhere learning lessons the hard way. She hoped he became better, hoped he found some version of peace. But mostly she hoped he stayed far away from her and Jack, living his own life while she lived hers. Because this life, this beautiful, complicated, real life, was hers. She'd built it from grief and betrayal, and her mother's incredible foresight. She'd proven that success didn't require cruelty, that power didn't require ruthlessness, that you could be ethical and ambitious simultaneously. The empire she'd built wasn't just profitable, it was good, and that made all the difference. Chapter 9. The meeting he doesn't deserve. Patrick's email came through Morrison's office with a subject line that made Benita's assistant pause before forwarding it. Please. Just 10 minutes for closure. Closure. The word annoyed Benita. Patrick wanted closure for himself, not for her. She had closure. She'd found it by building a life that didn't include him. But Morrison advised that one final meeting might prevent future contact attempts. Let him say what he needs to say. Then you never have to see him again. The coffee shop was deliberately ordinary. Generic chain on a Tuesday afternoon, the kind of place where nobody would recognize either of them. Benita arrived first, ordering tea she didn't drink, sitting at a corner table where she could see the door. She wore jeans and a sweater, no jewelry except her mother's necklace, not trying to look powerful, not trying to look anything except done with this conversation before it started. Patrick walked in exactly on time. He looked different, older, obviously, but also diminished in ways that weren't physical. The confidence he'd worn like armor had disappeared, leaving someone who moved through the world uncertain of his place in it. He wore khakis and a button-down shirt that probably came from the sale rack. His watch was plastic, not luxury. Everything about him screamed ordinary. He sat down without asking permission. Up close, Benita could see the exhaustion in his face. Stress had carved lines around his eyes and mouth. His hair was graying at the temples now, no expensive dye covering it. This was what consequences looked like after living with them for 2 years. "Thank you for agreeing to meet," Patrick said, his voice lacking the authority it used to carry. "I know I don't deserve your time." "You don't. I'm giving you 10 minutes because my lawyer said it might stop you from trying to contact me again." Benita checked her phone. 9.5 minutes now. Patrick flinched but accepted the harshness. "I wanted to apologize. Not the way I did before, with excuses and justifications. Just, I'm sorry. For all of it. The divorce timing, the cruelty, the selfishness, everything." "Okay. Apology noted. Is that all? I also wanted to ask about Jack, not to see him or have any rights, just to know how he is, if he's healthy, if he's happy." Patrick's hands trembled slightly around his coffee cup. "I know I signed away the right to know, but I think about him every day." Benita's expression didn't soften. "Jack is extraordinary. He's 2 years old, verbal, curious, happy. He has a home where he's loved unconditionally. He has James, who's more of a father to him than you ever would have been. He doesn't know you exist, and I'm keeping it that way until he's old enough to understand the truth." "Which is?" "That his biological father chose to abandon him before he was born. That you signed away your parental rights to avoid child support. That you valued money over your own son." Benita's voice stayed level. "When Jack asks, I'll tell him the truth. Not to hurt you. You're irrelevant to that decision. But because Jack deserves honesty." Patrick looked like he might cry. "I made a mistake. The worst mistake of my life. If I could go back..." "You can't. Nobody can. Time moves forward. You made choices and now you live with them." Benita checked her phone again. 5 minutes left. "If you have something else to say it now." "I wanted to know if there was any possibility, any chance at all, that someday, when Jack is older, I could meet him. Not as his father, just as someone who exists, someone who thinks about him." Patrick's voice broke. "I know it's too much to ask, but I have to ask anyway because the not knowing is killing me." "No." The word was absolute. "Jack is happy and secure. Why would I introduce chaos into his life by telling him about someone who abandoned him? What benefit does that give him? Because this isn't about what you need, Patrick. This is about protecting my son from people who've proven they can't be trusted. I wouldn't hurt him. You already did. You hurt him by not existing, by choosing yourself over him before he was even born. Bonita stood up. You want absolution from me. You want to feel like you're not the villain. But I can't give you that. You are the villain in this story. You always will be. Nothing you do now changes what you did then. Patrick stood as well, desperation clear in his posture. What if I spend the next 10 years becoming better? What if I prove I've changed? Would you consider letting me know Jack then? Patrick, listen to me carefully. Jack is not a prize you can win by demonstrating personal growth. He's not a goal you can achieve by becoming a better person. He's my son, and I will protect him from anyone who might hurt him, including you, especially you. Bonita picked up her bag. The best thing you can do for Jack is stay away from him. Let him grow up without the complication of knowing his father abandoned him. That's the kindest thing you could possibly do. So I'm just supposed to never know him, never have any relationship with my own son? Yes, that's exactly what you're supposed to do. You made that choice when you signed the papers. Now you live with it. Bonita moved toward the door. I hope you build a good life, Patrick. I genuinely do. Not for me. I don't care about your happiness or suffering anymore. But for you. Because living in regret forever isn't the punishment you think it is. It's just sad. She walked out without looking back. Patrick stood in the coffee shop, holding cold coffee and the crushing knowledge that Bonita didn't hate him anymore. She felt nothing. Indifference. He'd become so irrelevant to her life that his suffering was background noise she didn't even notice. Patrick sat back down and stared at the table. The conversation had gone exactly as he'd feared. Bonita was done with him, completely, permanently done. There was no path back to her or Jack, no redemption arc, no eventual forgiveness, just the void where his family should have been, and the knowledge that he'd created that void himself. A barista approached. Sir, are you okay? Do you need anything? Patrick looked up. No, there's nothing anyone can give me that would help, but thank you for asking. He left the coffee shop and drove back to his apartment, a studio now since living with Tommy had become too humiliating after a year. The apartment was bare, furniture from IKEA, no decorations, nothing that suggested a person with a past or future lived there, just the functional minimum required for existence. Patrick's phone showed messages from his sales manager asking about client follow-ups. He ignored them and opened his photo gallery instead. He had exactly 3 pictures of Jack. Screenshots from Bonita's public social media before she'd made everything private. Jack at 6 months, laughing at something off camera. Jack at 1 year, covered in birthday cake. Jack at 18 months, holding James's hand while walking in a park. That last photo hurt most. Jack with James, Jack with the father Patrick should have been, the man who'd shown up and stayed and loved Bonita and Jack without needing anything in return except the privilege of being part of their family. Everything Patrick could have been if he'd made different choices. His phone rang, a number he didn't recognize. Patrick almost declined, but answered out of habit. Hello? Patrick Wilson? A woman's voice. This is Diane from Community Mental Health Services. Your mother called us. She's concerned about you and thinks you might benefit from counseling services. We have sliding scale fees based on income. His mother had called a mental health crisis line on his behalf. That was how bad things had gotten. His own mother thought he was at risk. Patrick thanked Diane, took down the number, promised to call for an appointment. He wouldn't call, but he appreciated that someone cared enough to try. That night, Patrick lay in his cheap bed in his cheap apartment, listening to traffic outside. He thought about the house he'd lost, the company he'd destroyed, the family he'd abandoned. He thought about Bonita in her beautiful home, with Jack and James, living the life Patrick had thrown away. He thought about Gina, with her cryptocurrency billionaire, posting from yachts and private islands. Everyone had moved on except Patrick, who was stuck in the consequences of choices he couldn't undo. The meeting with Bonita had accomplished something, just not what Patrick wanted. It had confirmed that he would spend the rest of his life as a cautionary tale in someone else's story. He was the before photo, the mistake that taught the lesson, the villain who got what he deserved. His role was fixed, no redemption coming, no dramatic transformation that would change how history remembered him. Patrick was 38 years old. He'd spend the next 40 years working jobs that didn't fulfill him, paying debts that would never be fully cleared, living with knowledge that he'd destroyed his own life through arrogance and cruelty. That was his punishment. Not poverty. He could have survived being poor, not obscurity. He'd never cared about fame anyway. The punishment was understanding, knowing exactly what he'd lost and why he'd lost it, and that nothing would ever give it back. He thought about calling the mental health number, thought about therapy and processing and healing, but what could a therapist say that would change facts, that would give him back his son or his self-respect or his future? Some mistakes were too fundamental to process away. Some consequences just had to be lived with until they either destroyed you or taught you how to exist as a smaller version of yourself. Patrick chose existing, got up the next morning, went to work, made his sales calls, came home, repeated the cycle, not because he wanted to, because that's what people did. They kept going even when going forward felt like walking through concrete. They existed in the space between who they'd been and who they'd become, and they found ways to make peace with the distance. But peace felt far away tonight. Tonight felt like grief and regret and the crushing weight of knowing he'd had everything and thrown it away for nothing. Tonight felt like what it probably felt like to be Patrick Wilson for the rest of his life. And somewhere across the city, Benita was tucking Jack into bed, reading him stories, kissing his forehead, living a beautiful life that had no space for Patrick in it. That was the real revenge. Not making him suffer, making him irrelevant, making him understand that she'd moved on so completely that his suffering didn't even register in her awareness. Patrick rolled over and stared at the wall until exhaustion finally brought something close to sleep. Tomorrow he'd try again. Tomorrow he'd keep existing. Tomorrow he'd continue being the villain in a story that was no longer about him. That was all he had left. That was all he'd left himself with. And somehow he'd have to find a way to live with that until living felt less like punishment and more like just living. Chapter 10. The Life She Chose. Jack's kindergarten graduation filled the elementary school auditorium with parents holding phones, documenting tiny humans in construction paper caps, accepting certificates. Bonita sat between James and Mrs. Okoye, crying without shame when Jack walked across the stage. He was 5 years old and impossibly perfect, smart, kind and funny in ways that constantly surprised her. "That's my boy," Bonita whispered, and James squeezed her hand. After the ceremony, Jack ran to them waving his diploma. James lifted him onto his shoulders and they headed for ice cream. While they waited in line, Bonita watched James and Jack discuss flavor options with the seriousness of contract negotiations. This was her family. This was what mattered, not the company valuations or magazine covers, just these moments, ordinary, precious, and fleeting. Nivola Technologies had reached valuations that made Bonita uncomfortable with wealth she'd never use. The company was worth over $1 billion now, growing steadily through innovation and ethical practices. Bonita had turned down 12 acquisition offers in 5 years. This wasn't for sale. This was legacy. Forbes kept asking for interviews. Other women in tech treated her like proof that success didn't require cruelty. Bonita accepted some invitations and declined others. Her identity wasn't female CEO or woman who destroyed ex-husband. She was just Bonita, mother, partner, leader, daughter of a woman who taught her that real power was quiet. That evening, after Jack was asleep, Bonita and James sat on their porch drinking wine and watching fireflies. 5 years ago, she'd been signing divorce papers at her mother's funeral. Now she had peace. "Do you ever think about him?" James asked. He meant Patrick, though he rarely said the name. "Not really. Sometimes I hear things. He's working in sales, remarried, has a daughter." Bonita sipped her wine. "I hope he's a better father to her than he was to Jack. Everyone deserves chances to learn from mistakes." That's generous of you. Not generous, indifferent. Benita watched the fireflies blink. For a long time I was angry. Then I was satisfied watching him face consequences. Now I just don't care. He exists somewhere doing something, and it has nothing to do with my life. James pulled her close. I love you, not because of your success, but because you chose grace instead of bitterness. Mama taught me that bitterness is expensive, Benita said, leaning into him. Better to build something beautiful. A notification lit up Benita's phone. A message from Morrison. Patrick's attorney sent another request for information about Jack's well-being. Medical records, school reports. I declined per your standing instructions. Patrick was still trying, still hoping for some connection to the son he'd abandoned. Benita felt nothing except mild annoyance at the disruption. She typed back, "Continue declining. If requests escalate, pursue restraining order." Morrison replied, "Understood. For what it's worth, I think he's genuinely remorseful." "Remorse doesn't change history," Benita said aloud. She showed James the messages. "Does he deserve to know Jack is okay?" James asked carefully. Benita considered it. "No, he signed away his rights. That includes information. Jack is our son now, not his." James nodded, offering no judgment, just support. They sat in comfortable silence, watching their neighborhood settle into night. Patrick had chased extraordinary, the IPO, the image, the lifestyle. Benita had built ordinary, the bedtime stories, the school graduations, the porch conversations, and her ordinary was better than his extraordinary had ever been. The next morning, Benita took Jack to visit Mama Nivola's grave. They did this monthly, Jack leaving small flowers or drawings. "Tell Grandma about kindergarten," Benita prompted. Jack launched into a detailed explanation of playground rules. Benita listened, feeling her mother's presence like warmth. "Mama says you built something amazing," Benita told her mother silently. "Not just the money, the security, the freedom to choose grace." On the drive home, the question finally came. "Mama, why don't I have a dad like the other kids?" Benita had prepared for this. "You did have a father, but he made a choice not to be in your life. That wasn't about you. You're perfect. It was about him not being ready to be a good dad. Where is he now? Living somewhere else, being a dad to another child." Benita watched Jack process this in the rearview mirror. "You have me and James, and so many people who love you. Family isn't about biology, it's about who shows up." "I like our family," Jack decided simply. Years continued flowing past, smooth and unstoppable. Jack grew from 5 to 8. Benita's company grew from $1 billion valuation to something larger, more stable. She'd built exactly what her mother had envisioned. Patrick existed somewhere in the city, living his reduced life, working steadily, living in an apartment that wasn't awful but wasn't impressive. He'd found some version of normal after losing everything. Good. Benita wanted him to be okay. Existing without causing harm was enough. On what would have been her 10th wedding anniversary with Patrick, Benita was instead celebrating 5 years with James. They renewed their commitment in a quiet ceremony in their backyard. That night, lying in bed, Benita thought about the woman she'd been 10 years ago. Broken but not defeated. She'd taken grief and betrayal and transformed them into something beautiful. She'd proven that the opposite of love wasn't hate. It was indifference. She had become so completely indifferent to Patrick that his existence was background noise. "What are you thinking about?" James asked sleepily. "How far I've traveled, how much better this life is." Benita turned to him. He wanted the performance of success. I chose the reality of it. Jack's voice came through the baby monitor, calling for water. Benita got up, kissed James goodnight, and went to her son's room. Jack was sitting up, looking small and sleepy. "Here you go, baby." She handed him the water. "Mama, do you think I'll be like you when I grow up?" "What do you mean?" "Strong, like you, building things." Jack's eyes were serious. I want to be good at stuff like you are. Bonita's throat tightened. You're already good at so many things. And yes, you'll be strong. But not because you're like me. Because you're you. You have your grandmother's intelligence and your own kindness. Did Grandma build stuff too? She built everything we have. She worked night shifts and bought land nobody wanted and played the longest game anyone ever played. You come from strength, Jack. Never forget that. Love you, Mama. Love you more than anything. Walking back to her bedroom, Bonita passed the photo wall. Images of Jack, her mother, James. This was her life now. This was what winning looked like. Not revenge, not destruction, just building something so full of love and purpose that the person who'd hurt her became irrelevant. Patrick would spend his life knowing what he'd lost. Bonita would spend hers enjoying what she'd built. That asymmetry, that permanent, unbridgeable gap between his regret and her joy, was the revenge that lasted forever. As Bonita drifted toward sleep, her last thought was gratitude. Not for the betrayal, but for what she'd discovered while surviving it. She was stronger than she'd known, more capable than she'd believed. Some women don't get mad, they don't get even. They get everything, and they get it by becoming so extraordinary that the person who discarded them becomes a footnote in a much longer story about resilience. Patrick's choices had been worth nothing. Bonita's had been worth everything, and that made all the difference.